back. WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. I'm wearing my Coons Ford Security Boulevard shirt. Dennis Colossus will be here on Thursday from 3 until 5, driving you home on the Dennis Colazzo Show, as well as again on Sunday when the Ravens take on the Pittsburgh Steelers. It certainly was not enough against the Los Angeles Rams. Luke Jones joins us now, all courtesy of our friends at Royal Farms. Real fresh, real fast. I've got some tasty Jamaican Blue Mountain blend in my my Cole Roofing mug right now, and Luke, I'm not ready for the off season. I sat around later in the day on Sunday and watched these other teams play, and I wanted to believe that they would have a chance to beat the Rams, and then we look up and they have a lead. I come down to the press box late in the game, they have a lead. We need to talk about the game and the teams as much as the offseason and the Steelers and Ben Roethlisberger this week and all of that and what went wrong globally. But what went wrong on Sunday, 2 yards, right? I mean, this is when you lose by a point, and they've lost by a point or two a bunch lately. That's another thing they can rest their hat on in the offseason. They were in every game except these Bengals games. And we'll talk about them and the Chiefs in the next segment. But the actual act of beating the Rams, and we're sitting here scratching ourselves, feeling sorry for ourselves, this was a winnable game. I mean, aside from everything else, it's a game they could have won.
There's no question about it. And, I mean, certainly you can look back at the end of the first half. Tyler Huntley throws the interception, which I think Sean McVay pointed to in his post-game comments. Kind of felt like that was the game that kind of woke them, or that was the play that woke them up, kind of snapped them out of their first half sleepwalking act, which, I think we mentioned it a little bit last week, but the Rams had navigated it well, and they won on Sunday, but a West Coast team, 1 o'clock game. Originally, that was supposed to be a 4:25 game. Did that work to the Ravens' advantage a little bit? Well, Matthew Stafford played like it was to be a 4 o'clock game with him turning the ball over. But, that interception, you could certainly point to that. And, should the Ravens have been a little more conservative there? Well, I mean, the Rams called a couple timeouts, who knows? But yeah, as I wrote at BaltimorePositive.com, you have second and goal at the 2-yard line with just over 6 minutes remaining. You're leading by 2 points. Justin Tucker is as close to automatic as it comes in this league as it pertains to extra points. So you get 2 yards, and you've just made it a 2-possession game with 6 minutes to go. Now, stranger things have happened, but you
probably win that game.
Yeah, right. You're talking about a very high win probability scenario. And as I wrote, and I looked at ESPN's win probability model, when you're second and goal at the 2-yard line in that situation, they had the Ravens at 87% chance of winning. So, and obviously that's assuming you're going to get 2 yards in the next couple plays and score a touchdown there. And, well, they didn't. And I think one thing that, I don't want to say it was ironic, but it was just the latest example of an injury or an illness or just a lack of availability doing them in. On that second down play, what happens? Rams nose tackle Greg Gaines uses a swim move that makes Tristan Colon, the backup center, look bad. Bradley Bozeman was on the sideline with an illness, wearing a medical mask on the sideline and did not play. So you're missing your starting center in another.
Did we ever get to the bottom of that? Was that COVID or what he's standing out there with everybody, right?
Well, it's not COVID. I mean,
right.
He wouldn't be out there if he had tested positive for COVID. But, John Harbaugh said he was very ill that morning. I assume they gave him a rapid test and it came up negative. He was out there in an emergency scenario. He was suited up, but he did not play. So, clearly he felt he wasn't healthy enough that he was going to play. And the Ravens decided to go with Tristan Colon. And
dude, with all the injuries and all the COVID and all the COVID non-injury and all the, I mean, on any given team in any given week, who actually is out there playing once the whistle blows? There's no shocker that, Bozeman's got a mask on. Maybe he's got COVID. Maybe he's getting tested. I don't know what's going on. He's not playing. It's 1 o'clock. The virus does not care what time of the day or what game of the week or whether you play on Wednesday or Sunday. It's been a mess the last month, to ask, why is that guy not playing? I don't think you could assume anybody's going to play ever.
Well, I mean, you never can. I mean, Orlando Brown hurt his calf in the pregame for the Chiefs. I mean, it's always been that case with injuries. And then when you have a virus like this, that's why, going back to last year, I even said you kind of have to treat it from a football standpoint, from a planning standpoint. You have to treat it in the sense of, a little bit of a higher than normal injury rate as it pertains to players being in and out of the lineup. And we've seen that play out. So, but there was a perfect example, 2nd and goal from the 2, and your backup center gets beaten badly by the nose tackle, blows up the play, turns into 3rd and 4 or 3rd and goal from the 4. And you inexplicably take a delay of game. I mean, there's been too much of that, whether, and to his credit, Tyler Huntley hadn't had too many examples of that, but we saw way too much of that with Lamar Jackson. How much of that is the quarterback? How much of that is the play not coming in a timely manner, or not coming in more quickly? I mean, I'm guessing it's a combination of things, but regardless, whether it's the coach failing to call a timeout on the sideline there, or Tyler Huntley just not seeing the play clock, or the center not snapping the ball, that cannot happen there. I mean, that's inexcusable. I don't care if it's starters or backups playing. That can't happen for an NFL team that fancies itself as a playoff contender in Week 17. So that was just brutal. Makes it 3rd and goal from the 9, and then you take a sack. And I mean, what felt like should be an easy 7 points when you're 2nd and goal from the 2-yard line turned into 3, and I think
it makes a hell of a lot difference for the week for around here, because if they win the football game, as much as we're lamenting the offseason and John's coaching and Greg Roman's coaching and who's playing, they'd be in line to make noise to be a playoff team this week had they made 2 yards, period.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about that going into Week 17. I mean, the scenarios, and look, I haven't done the what if game because it's hard enough trying to figure out what the actual scenario is at this point, Nestor, where the Ravens basically need to win and have 3 or 4 other things fall in their favor, including the Jaguars beating the Indianapolis Colts, which is kind of the most unlikely of the bunch of scenarios they need. But if they all along, even after the ugliness in Cincinnati, they were a very high percentage play to make the playoffs if they won their last 2 games. So, you score a touchdown there. Again, not saying it's wrapped up, but you're in very good shape at that point. You're in excellent shape, up 9 points with just about 6 minutes to go. It's just they didn't do it. And there was an uneasiness from that point on when they kicked a field goal there. As much as everyone has been, all we've heard in recent weeks as far as the critiques of going for it on 4th down or not getting a 2-point conversion is take the points. Well, Justin Tucker kicked 4 field goals on Sunday. And guess what happened? They lost
by a point.
You need to score points in this league. I mean, ultimately, backup quarterback or not, you're not going to win many games in this league unless you have the 2000 Ravens defense. And I don't think that defense, even in the climate in which games are played today with the rules catering towards the offense, you're not going to win many games when you don't score an offensive touchdown. I mean, that's just the truth. They got 1 touchdown. They got it from their defense, their first defensive touchdown all season. So they got the takeaways that gave them a chance in this one.
Well, you just went over that. That was their first defensive touchdown this season.
Yeah, season high 3 takeaways as well. So
hard to be better than 8-8 if that's a truth.
Well, and I say this all the time, and it sounds nerdy for people who don't look at this kind of stuff, but I always kind of talk about those plays that are going to shake up the win probability, right? It's going to flip it. Those types of plays that turnovers are at the top of that list. Special teams returns, and okay, the Ravens, great special teams. So that's something that has helped them in many of these close games, starting with Justin Tucker being your kicker. But you look at these, you look how often a team wins when they win the turnover margin by a couple, which the Ravens, technically they committed a turnover on the final play. In fact, it was weird. I was looking at it at the box score, and I saw 3-2 in terms of turnovers. I'm like, where did the second turnover come from? It was Marquise Brown credited with a lost fumble in the very last play, which, I mean, it was over at that point anyway. But in that scenario, you have a +2 turnover margin in a game. I think I want to say the math is right around 80% of teams win that have that kind of a turnover margin. When you look at it mathematically speaking, they haven't had enough of that this year. And as much as we've looked at, even going back to when they were 8-3, their turnover margin has been at the bottom of the league, right near the bottom of the league all year. They haven't forced really any turnovers. They've been right near the bottom there. And, offensively, they haven't been awful turning over the football, but they've had their stretches where they've turned it over too much. And certainly we talked about that with Lamar Jackson in his last 4 or 5 weeks before hurting his ankle. So those are the things that matter in close games. We talk about this all the time. The true mark of greatness in this league isn't winning a bunch of close games, although certainly you need to do that. The true mark of greatness is winning by larger margins. And we saw that a lot with the 2019 Ravens. We saw that a lot with the Ravens late last year. But when you're playing a lot of close games, that margin for error is tiny. That's why forcing a turnover in a key spot, converting in a goal-to-go situation, not throwing a pick in a 2-minute drill at the end of the first half. I mean, these are the kind of things that really change the outlook of the game. And let's be clear, I don't want to be contradictory here. You know me, I'm a guy that wants to be aggressive, by my nature in looking at this. I had no problem with the Ravens wanting to try to score when they got the ball back inside 2 minutes. They had all 3 timeouts left. But in the case where Huntley throws the ball up and there's a miscommunication with Marquise Brown being the intended receiver, that woke up the Rams. That really turned the game where you're up 10 points and you have a chance to go up 13 or 17, but instead you turn it over and they score a touchdown. That really, they had a chance to have a real vice grip, an anaconda-like grip on that football game going into halftime. And instead, the Rams score. Yeah, the Ravens added a field goal there, but
well, the question about how aggressive you want to be in the last 2 minutes with a 10-point lead is a fair question.
Yeah, and with a backup quarterback who, again, Tyler Huntley has played admirably, but you are talking about someone who is inexperienced. You're talking about a quarterback who was an undrafted free agent a year ago, and that's not a knock on him. It's just looking at the situation and trying to play the best of both worlds, right? You want to protect your quarterback, but at the same time, I think there also was a sense of John Harbaugh watched this defense a week ago, and yeah, they had some guys back, but they were also missing some guys. Anthony Averett wasn't out there. Odafe Owe wasn't out there. So, you're in the position of, it's 10-0, but are you sure your defense is going to completely shut the Rams down in the second half? So, you'd like to take an opportunity there to try to get some points. It didn't work out. So, I think it's very easy. Fans and media alike do this where you second guess from a backwards position. You look at it from hindsight and say, oh, what's the final score? Well, he shouldn't have done that back in the second quarter. Well, John Harbaugh doesn't know what the final score is going to be in the second quarter when he makes a decision. Greg Roman doesn't know that. Wink Martindale doesn't know that. And that's not to excuse them when something goes wrong, but you have to look at it in the moment kind of situation to judge these decisions. So, I didn't mind being aggressive, trying to get points there. Chucking a ball up downfield and having a miscommunication result and an interception, that's where you look at it and say, and if you even go back and look at that play, Mark Andrews, right before he threw the ball, kind of breaks open on the other side of the field if Huntley sees him. Again, easier said than done playing quarterback, watching it on TV, but that was a case of maybe a little bit too aggressive and ultimately ended up costing them and kind of put the Rams back in a position where they were feeling good about themselves going into halftime.
How important is it for you to see Lamar Jackson this week?
I mean, look, if he's completely healthy, I'd love to see Lamar Jackson out there. And people will say, oh, the draft pick. It's not as though they're going to be moving into a top 5 pick if they lose another game. I'd love to see him just because I like seeing Lamar Jackson. And I think there would be some tangible value to having him feel better about himself, this offense feeling better about themselves, if he's right. Again, this is not saying he goes out there and plays at 80%. I doubt it. That I have my...
Well, you saw him on the field Wednesday. You're one of the few people that actually watched him run around.
Right, and that's where I really have my doubts that we'll see him, and if we do, if he's going to be anything close to 100%, because at that point, you are talking about this and it's evident this was more serious than John Harbaugh indicated. A big shock. I know we're all stunned by that, but for competitive reasons, clearly he wasn't going to broadcast that. But the report came out a couple weeks ago that it was a bone bruise, not just a sprained ankle, and that's something you want to be careful with. And I said it to you after the Bengals loss. For me, what was the red flag as far as really doubting how close he actually was that that Willis Reed scenario wasn't even in play in Cincinnati. He didn't even make the trip. I mean, if Josh Johnson, tears his MCL on the second play of the second quarter, they were going to go with Kenji Bahar rather than whatever percent Lamar Jackson was at that point in time.
To even hand the ball off.
Right. To me, that was telling that he wasn't close. And that's why on Wednesday, when we saw him out on the practice field, and I wrote this in my 12 thoughts at BaltimorePositive.com going into the weekend, that when I saw him limping in the manner in which he did, Nestor, a small part of me wondered, is this some really bad acting? Like that this is a show that he's just, up walking with a pronounced lip. There's some hyperbole going on here. And as soon as we all leave the field, that he's going to be running around just fine. Well, we learned the answer to that was he didn't practice on Thursday and Friday. So to see him out there the way that he looked, to understand that across the board, it's kind of a 2% chance that they have right now of making the playoffs. If they win, Indianapolis loses, the Chargers, you go down the list of scenarios, and we know, and you can check that out at BaltimorePositive.com. But I just don't see enough upside unless he is feeling great by the end of the week, and you want him out there because you do have a small chance. If by the miracle of the football gods, they do get in the playoffs, and Lamar Jackson plays week 18, well, it's a nice little tune-up for him to try to win a wild card game on the road the following week. But I don't see that. If you're asking me right now to make a prediction, and this isn't based on hearing this from anyone in the organization, it's just looking at everything. He was ruled out in Cleveland to start the second half, didn't practice for 2 full weeks, didn't even make the trip to Cincinnati, practices once on a limited basis, and then doesn't practice the rest of the week. I'd be surprised if we see him against the Steelers on Sunday. And, again, if I'm wrong and he plays, then great. I'll look forward to watching Lamar Jackson because he's really fun to watch. Let's keep that in mind amidst all the frustration here and all the questions about the big picture. But I just don't know, one, if he's going to be anywhere close to it mattering, quite frankly, from a health standpoint. And two, if he's at 80%, 85%, is that really worth it when your odds of making the playoffs are so small anyway, assuming there would be a chance at a setback, something along those lines. So
it's just such a long off season, right? And it's such a tough off season. And to have it dissipate like this, where he limps off the field, goes out and runs around in a practice for a minute or two for you guys, and then the next time we see him will be in August, right? Like literally, that's the way the organization is. That's the way COVID's been. That's the way that the team runs itself at this point, in sort of running and hiding. We may see him doff a cap on draft night or something, but it's a long 8 months between here and August, bro. It's a long 9 months between now and September when they're going to play a game that matters again. I'm not saying he should get out there. I'm just saying from a mojo perspective that this is the end for him here this season. That's a tough off season for him. And he's done well with off seasons. He's been a growth guy in the off season. Big time. Big time. Yeah. Everybody will tell you that I don't know how that goes this year if he doesn't step back on it. As he would always say, I'm ticked off. I bet he's ticked off.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question about that. And keep in mind OTAs. So May, they had OTAs this past spring. No reason to think they wouldn't have it this spring. But that is tough. And
those don't count to me for some reason.
I understand, but they count for me because I'm out there, right? So, but I think it's just so difficult when you consider the back-to-back nature of you lose Marlon Humphrey on what amounted to the last meaningful defensive play of that Pittsburgh game. And then you lose Lamar Jackson 1 quarter later in Cleveland the following week. You're talking about and look, we talked about this. Humphrey, did he have his best season this year? No. But is he their best defensive player, all things being equal, year in and year out at this point? Yes, I unequivocally, I believe that. So you lose him, and then you lose your franchise quarterback roughly a quarter later in back-to-back games against two of your division rivals, 2 games that were, they weren't as crucial then. They didn't feel as crucial then as they do now, but they were important. I mean, they went into the Pittsburgh game as the number 1 seed in the conference. Then they lose that Cleveland game and you lose your quarterback and suddenly you're on skates. And you knew at that point, nothing was guaranteed moving forward. So, I mean, that's just a lot. That's heavy. that's heavy for an organization to lose that. And look, neither one of them suffered the kind of injury that you worry about them coming back 100%. Thank goodness for that. You're not talking about ACLs or Achilles tendons or anything like that for those two. But to lose those two guys, that's why I said after the Pittsburgh game when they lost Humphrey, to me, that kind of felt like the breaking point. And then you lose your franchise quarterback. And again, I know he wasn't playing particularly well in the month leading up to that. And Tyler Huntley did some really nice things. But Sunday, it was evident that the Ravens missed the upside of a healthy Lamar Jackson playing at a very high level. They just didn't get that. And of course they didn't. You're not going to expect that out of Tyler Huntley, but it just makes things that much more difficult. And to your point, yeah, I think if Lamar Jackson doesn't play against the Steelers, and again, my assumption at this point is I'd be surprised if we see him just based on all the variables at work here. That is a tough offseason, especially for him when you're talking about a contract situation where, yeah, he's under contract. He's going to make a bunch of money 2022 with that 5th-year option, with a claim that he's already reached in his career, and deservedly so. But that's heavy and that's tough. And when you lose and miss out in the way that the Ravens have with a 5-game losing streak, forget all the injuries, just the mathematical attrition of losing 5 straight games to go from number 1 seed to being well on the outside looking in, going into week 18, needing a miracle scenario of things to happen. That's tough. That's tough. That would be tough for any player, let alone talking about a franchise quarterback who knows that he's the face of the franchise and knows that they live and die with him. And they were 8-3 in very large part because of his heroics over the first 6-7 weeks of the regular season. And their collapse was in part because of him struggling, but then ultimately really being about him getting hurt and not being able to right what had been his season going in the wrong direction.
He hasn't made a lot of money, right? Like, I'm looking at the contract when you consider the acclaim for him, and he hasn't done commercial endorsements or made a whole bunch of Subway money on the side or any of that. I mean, he's a guy that's made less than $3 million a year every year. I mean, he's only made $9 million in his career, right? $10 million.
I mean, that's the genius of taking finding a franchise quarterback at 32nd overall. And as much as you and I and other people who don't know what they're talking about, as much as we like to think we do, we're not professionals when it comes to
how about this? Ronnie Stanley has made as much money in the last 10 weeks as Lamar has made in his whole career. How about that? That's kind of and Ronnie hasn't suited up. That's no disrespect, but that's just where the same thing with Marlon Humphrey. When you get the $30-40 million a year deal and you get it. You get your signing bonus and all that, but literally Ronnie Stanley has been more than a $9 million player for the Ravens over the last 10 weeks, and Lamar hasn't made that money. It's really I don't want to say it's not equitable, because I could get into a whole political argument with Moeller about equity and equitable and what's fair and all of that, but there's a part for him that the $23 million next year, that's what's going to set him up for life. Because he's really not set up for life right now, probably.
Yeah. I mean, and obviously that always goes into decisions that you make with your money. That anyone.
I'm not saying either one of us made $9 million, but taxes where it is, all of that. I would say he's a guy that still has a lot to prove to get paid. He's got an MVP, blah blah blah. He's pissed off for greatness. He's all that, but he's just a rudimentary NFL player from a payment standpoint so far, for what he's going to get in the future. I don't want to Roger Dorn him or anything, but if I'm him, I'm not running around out there this week at 85% just to feel good about myself. That's not Lamar's style, but if Lamar had an agent, or he's got a mother, but if he had an agent, they would say, dude, you're going to make $23 million next year. You can't win anything this week other than the last game of Ben Roethlisberger's career. Go over there and sit down and chill out a little bit. Get your $23 million next year and get yourself in line to get a contract. Because I don't think these guys are going to be waving $200 million signing bonuses in front of Lamar here in the next 6 months. I would be shocked about that.
Well, I mean, I'll disagree in this. The one thing I disagree with is he's proven plenty to get paid. Now, it's going to be a matter of if it's Patrick Mahomes money or Dak Prescott money. I think that's the big key. And look, that's a pretty sizable difference there. Let's be very clear. Even though you just said it, $23 million compared to $30 million a year, compared to $40 million a year, compared to $50 million a year. That it's life-changing money for any common guy like us. But there is a difference there. But I think you made an excellent point that I had thought of, but I guess I probably didn't think of carefully enough. That's where, if you're Lamar Jackson, there's no way you should have the people that are advising you. You should be telling him, Lamar, no.
Lamar,
no,
you couldn't walk yesterday enough to play. You're not playing in 5 days for no good reason, right?
Right, literally. Exactly. This team has a 2% chance of making the playoffs. And that's where as you bring that up, that's where I even change my mind on that, where it's just like,
well, I'm looking at his contract, like in numbers in front of me, 1.7, 2.2, 2.6, 3 million. He only made $3 million this he's only getting $250,000 a week to go out and play, like literally just go suit up. They're just at a different point financially with him, spiritually with him, and I know they love him and they believe in him, and I know at some point they believe they're going to marry him. I don't think there's any doubt about that, but there have been a lot of marriages called off at the 11th hour based on money, based on years, based on terms, based on what are we doing here, what are we going to have left if we give him $40 million to surround him with when we can't surround him with what he needs now.
Yeah, and that's what I know. I've done this, and I did this last year a lot. It's why I keep going back to 2 years ago when they lost to the Titans in the divisional round, and everything was sitting there. Home field advantage. You're 14-2. You had this crazy offense, record-setting offense. You had a top 5 defense by the end of the season, and they lost. And I think there was such a sense of wanting to say, hey, this is the best is yet to come. They're a year early, right?
It's a tough sell right now.
Better. You look at everything that's happened. Look, COVID has been a big part of that. If we're being honest, look what happened last year. Look what happened against Cincinnati and Green Bay with some of the absences on top of their injuries. But it's why when you're in that position, you never know if you're going to get back to it right as good as that. And that's where you do look at this and you say, that's why I said in our previous conversation, you got to react without overreacting here. Yeah, injuries are a huge part of it, and COVID absences were a huge part of it these last few weeks, but there's still some things that they need to get done personnel-wise that I think they're going to have to balance that with other positions where they just say, hey, we'll just have to count on player A, B, and C coming back from injury because we can't address everything. So, but I continue to go back to that moment 2 years ago when it was sitting there. They were the overwhelming favorites, and they lost. And nothing has come as easily or has been as fruitful since then for a variety, for an array of reasons. And, now they're looking at being on the outside looking in come this now in January as we get deeper into January when the playoffs start.
Luke and I will continue to talk about Pittsburgh week around here and playoff scenarios for other teams as well. Don Moe is going to join us on a recon. We're going to get the Maryland Crab Cake Tour presented by the Maryland Lottery back out on the road next week to Nacho Mamas. I was sort of waiting for the schedule for Ravens playoff games that apparently aren't coming. You can find Luke, Baltimore Luke, and Luke at WNST.net all over social media. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, anywhere you are, we are. WNST, AM 1570. We never stop talking Baltimore positive.